The grand hall fell silent as the alien princess locked eyes with me, a dirt-smudged human in a jumpsuit. Then she declared, "He is mine," in front of her entire royal family. The ancient bond awakened, defying centuries of tradition. But what happens when a cosmic destiny chooses the most unlikely candidate? The High Sovereign's fury was palpable. The oracle would test our connection, and its verdict would change the fate of two worlds. Would the bond hold, or would politics tear us apart? Theo stumbled into the hall with motor oil on his knuckles and one bootlace untied. The perfumed air of the Zewandar Palace clung to him like an accusation. Around him, Athetheran nobles stood, frozen in their constellations of sapphire silks and platinum jewelry, their iridescent skin catching the light like abalone shells. His work jumpsuit smelled of earth, pine sap and diesel fuel cutting through the court's delicate floral incense. Where the dignitaries' robes whispered across polished floors, Theo's boots left faint scuff marks. He hadn't meant to interrupt their bonding ceremony. The maintenance tunnel had simply deposited him here. Science fiction loves this particular collision, the mundane human thrust into alien perfection. From Luke Skywalker's farm boy innocence to Arthur Dent's bathrobe confusion, ordinary men keep finding themselves at the center of extraordinary destinies. But those stories rarely show the immediate aftermath. The way Theo's calloused hands hung awkwardly at his sides, the damp patch forming under his arms. A chancellor in emerald robes sneered, her silver-veined nostrils flaring. The High Sovereign's jeweled fingers tightened around his scepter. This was supposed to be a political match, another carefully negotiated alliance to strengthen the empire. Not some human mechanic blinking sweat from his eyes. Then Princess Lasara turned. Her movement parted the nobles like a planetary tide. The ceremonial chains around her neck chimed softly as she stepped forward. Their eyes met, his earth-brown irises to her violet ones, and the crystals embedded in the ceiling flared brighter. For 3 heartbeats, the entire palace seemed to hold its breath. One of the elder statesmen muttered about ancient texts. A bond scholar's datapad clattered to the floor. Because in that moment, everyone present, even the skeptical, felt it. That impossible thing stirring in the space between a princess and this grease-stained man. Theo didn't know about the old bonds, those rare connections written about in half-forgotten prophecies. He didn't understand why the temperature had suddenly risen, or why the markings along Lasara's collarbones were glowing faint gold. All he knew was the way she looked at him, not with pity or disgust, but recognition. Something deep in the palace's foundation hummed, a sound felt more than heard. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. One of the younger attendants actually clutched at their chest, eyes wide, because this wasn't how bonding ceremonies worked. There were protocols, negotiations, genetic compatibility screenings. Then the whispering started. "Is that? But he's just the old stories mention..." The crowd's murmurs layered over each other like overlapping seismic readings. A few of the more traditional lords looked ready to summon the guards. Theo saw none of this. He was too busy staring at the woman before him, at the way strands of her moonlight-pale hair escaped their jeweled pins. She reached out one hand. A breach of etiquette so profound several nobles audibly gasped, and Theo, without thinking, reached back. Their fingertips didn't quite touch. They didn't need to. The air between them warped visibly, like heat rising off desert asphalt. Suddenly, every screen in the palace flickered to life, displaying the same symbol. 2 interlocking circles surrounded by 12 small stars. From somewhere in the crowd, a bond priest whispered, "The dual sun prophecy." 3 junior scholars fainted, but the real spectacle was just beginning. Because while Theo stood there processing exactly none of this, Princess Lasara did the unthinkable. She turned to her parents' thrones, squared her shoulders, and spoke 3 words that would rewrite imperial history. "He is mine." The chamber exploded into chaos. The crystal chandeliers trembled when Lasara spoke. Her declaration hung in the air, visible as a ripple of gold light spreading through the throne room. Every protocol tablet in the chamber flashed red warnings. Bonding ceremonies required approval from the High Council. genetic compatibility reports, at least 6 lunar cycles of negotiation. Not this. Never this. The High Sovereign's knuckles whitened around his scepter. The carved gemstones along its length glowed faintly, responding to his suppressed fury. At his side, the queen leaned forward, her silver-threaded robes shifting like liquid mercury. Something unfamiliar flickered across her face. Not anger, but something closer to awe. The queen had been a historian before her marriage. She recognized the symbols materializing in the air between her daughter and the human. Courtiers scrambled back as if burned. Chancellor Vexler dropped his ceremonial orb, sending it rolling across the polished floor until it bumped against Theo's scuffed boot. The contrast was almost comical. The priceless artifact lying at the feet of a man who smelled of engine grease. Several of the younger nobles failed to smirking, though they quickly schooled their expressions when the High Sovereign glared. Examples from fiction swarmed to mind: Padme Amidala proclaiming her love despite the Jedi Code, Daenerys, Targaryen breaking chains in Meereen. These fictional monarchs share one trait: their public declarations fracture the status quo irreparably. Lysara's 3 words had the same effect. The carefully scripted ceremony dissolved into murmured arguments. A gaggle of protocol droids whirred helplessly in circles, their programming unprepared for romantic spontaneity. Theo swallowed hard. A bead of sweat traced the curve of his temple. He understood none of the commotion, only that the beautiful alien woman had claimed him before a room full of angry-looking aristocrats. His Earth logic insisted this must be some misunderstanding, perhaps a cultural mistranslation. But the warmth spreading through his chest argued otherwise. It felt like waking from a dream he couldn't remember, familiar and unsettling all at once. Lord Nitherian, chief bond negotiator, spoke first. Your Radiance, this farce violates 14 sacred statutes. The ancient texts disagree, interrupted a thin voice. High Priestess Eval stepped forward, her aged hands tracing the symbols still shimmering in the air. The old bonds answered to no counsel. Murmurs swept through the assembly. The old bonds belonged to legend, connections said to form when twin souls recognized each other across star systems. Most scholars considered them poetic metaphor, yet here stood proof, Theo's fingertips now glowing the same gold as the markings along Lysara's collarbones. A junior ambassador fainted into someone's arms. The head scribe began frantically scanning, archives on her data tablet. Through it all, Lysara remained still as a statue, chin lifted in defiance. The warmth in Theo's chest pulsed stronger when he realized she was terrified. Her perfect poise couldn't mask the slight tremor in her clasped hands. This could mean exile, disinheritance. Why? The High Sovereign's voice cut through the noise, not angry now, but genuinely perplexed. A human? The unspoken questions hung heavier. A mechanic, a commoner, an alien. Lysara exhaled through her nose. The scent of Theo's world still clung to him, soil and sweat and something faintly citrus. Nothing like the perfumed nobles she'd been raised among. When she spoke next, her voice carried an odd resonance, as if multiple people spoke through her. It is the ancient call. The change startled even her. She hadn't meant to say that. The words left her lips unbidden, accompanied by a gust of wind. That extinguished half the ceremonial candles. Gasps erupted. Theo's hair stood on end as static crackled between them. In that moment, the throne room's west wall shimmered. The mural there, depicting the first Athetheran monarchs, suddenly revealed details no one had noticed before. Hidden among the painted stars were the same interlocking circles now hovering between Theo and Lysara. The High Priestess made a choked sound. The Oracle Chamber, she whispered. It must. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Even the most skeptical courtiers shifted uncomfortably. If this were some trick, the palace itself wouldn't be reacting. The very walls seemed to breathe around them, anticipating what came next. Theo knew nothing of Athetheran prophecy or political consequences. He only knew that when Lysara looked at him now, the fear in her eyes had faded. Something older and infinitely more patient looked out through them, something that remembered lifetimes before theirs. A distant chime echoed through the halls, 3 pure notes that vibrated in Theo's teeth. The queen went very still. "The constellations are aligning," she murmured. Chancellor Vexler wiped his brow. "Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to—" "The oracle will judge," interrupted the High Sovereign. His gaze never left Theo. "As it judged my ancestors." Whispers chased each other around the room. Oracle verdicts were binding. Final. Once rendered, not even the sovereign could overturn them. For the first time since stumbling into this nightmare, Theo felt real fear. Whatever test awaited, he was woefully unprepared. Lasara's fingers found his, threading through them with surprising familiarity. Her skin was cooler than human, textured with barely perceptible ridges along the palm. The contact sent another pulse of gold light radiating outward, making the mural's hidden symbols glow brighter. "Don't let go," she whispered. Servants scurried to open the great doors at the hall's far end. Beyond them stretched a hallway Theo hadn't noticed before, its walls alive with moving constellations. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something old. The high priestess led the procession, her ceremonial bells jangling with each step. The nobles followed in stunned silence, though several hung back, muttering about human contamination. Theo barely registered them. His entire world had narrowed to Lasara's hand in his and those 3 ominous words repeating in his head. "The oracle will judge." The oracle chamber hummed with latent energy, its walls alive with constellations that pulsed like a heartbeat. Theo's boots sank slightly into the iridescent floor, as if the room itself resisted his presence. He counted 7 distinct layers of moving light across the domed ceiling, each corresponding to a star system he couldn't name. The air tasted metallic, coating his tongue with a faint electric charge. Behind them, the courtiers formed a silent semicircle, their breathing shallow. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The chamber's ambient glow painted Lasara's profile in shifting blues and silvers, her lips slightly parted, the markings along her throat now pulsing in time with the walls. The High Sovereign stood apart from the others, his ceremonial robes unnaturally still. His gaze never left Theo. Not suspicion anymore, but something more complex, the look of a man watching history pivot. His wife, the queen, had one hand pressed to the chamber wall. Her fingertips trailed after the moving stars like a child, trying to catch fireflies. She alone seemed unsurprised when the central constellation detached itself from the ceiling, drifting downward in a slow spiral. The mass of light resolved into a shape, part nebula, part humanoid silhouette. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once, vibrating in Theo's molars. 2 stand before the pattern. The voice wasn't a voice at all, but something deeper, older. The words left after images in the air, glowing runes that hovered, briefly before dissolving. Sci-Fi oracles always serve this function, bridging the cosmic and the personal. From the glowing rectangles of Dune's spice-induced visions to the liquid metal sears of Foundation, they translate the incomprehensible into terms mortals can grasp. This oracle differed. It didn't ask questions or demand sacrifices. It simply observed, its light rippling across Theo's grease-stained sleeves and Lasara's bejeweled collar with equal dispassion. The High Priestess stepped forward, her aged hands trembling. "Ancient One, does the bond hold?" She avoided, looking at Theo. Her question was really a plea, for order, for tradition, for the universe to make sense. The constellation pulsed. A thread of golden light stretched from its core, dividing into 2 strands that wound toward Lasara and Theo. Theo flinched when it touched his sternum. The contact burned without heat, like holding ice too long. Across from him, Lasara's pupils dilated until her violet irises nearly disappeared. The light between them thickened, forming visible threads that vibrated with subsonic frequency. Several courtiers covered their ears. The queen mouthed a word. Theo couldn't tell if it was a prayer or a name. "Show us the truth." The High Sovereign's command cracked across the room. His scepter glowed crimson at the tip, the only point of warm color in the chamber. He wasn't asking permission. The oracle responded by expanding suddenly, its light throwing Theo's shadow 10 feet tall against the wall. The distorted silhouette didn't match his stance. It stood straighter, prouder, crowned with unfamiliar shapes. Gasps erupted behind them. Even the sovereign took a step back, because the shadow wasn't alone. Lasara's shadow intertwined. With it, their outlines merging in places like overlapping brushstrokes. New light burst from their clasped hands, not gold now, but a pale silver that made the chamber's stars realign. The wall behind them shimmered, revealing a mosaic none had noticed before. Two figures stood amid swirling galaxies, their hands joined exactly as Theo and Lasara's were now. The same interlocking circles glowed above them, Theo's knees. Nearly buckled as images flooded his mind, not memories but something else. A marketplace under triple suns, a child laughing in a garden that shouldn't exist on this planet. The taste of fruit he'd never eaten. He saw himself older, weary, but smiling, carving something from wood near a window. Through it all ran a thread of silver light connecting these fragments to the woman gasping beside him. Lasara swayed on her feet. One of the markings along her collarbone had split open like a seam, revealing not blood but that same silver light. She didn't seem to notice. "They're not mine," she whispered, confused. "These aren't my memories." The oracle's light intensified, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The chamber's temperature plummeted. Frost crystallized along Theo's lashes. Somewhere in the overload, a single thought surfaced. He'd left his toolbox in the maintenance tunnel. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. Here at the universe's crossroads, his mind clung to the mundane. Then the pressure relented. The lights contracted back into the oracle's core. For 3 heartbeats, silence held sway. Even the moving constellations on the walls stilled. When the verdict came, it shook the chamber's foundation. Not words this time, but pure meaning, imprinted directly into their minds. Pattern recognized. The bond is true. The accompanying rush of certainty left Theo lightheaded. There'd been no deliberation, no weighing of merits. The oracle didn't deal in maybes. The high priestess collapsed to her knees. Several courtiers followed, pressing their foreheads to the cold floor. Only the sovereign remained upright, his face unreadable. He studied the silver light still leaking from Lasara's collarbone, then Theo's grease-streaked face. Something in his stance shifted, not defeat but resignation laced with grudging awe. "So," he spoke quietly, for the first time addressing Theo directly. The ancient text spoke truth. Nearby, the queen made a soft sound. Her fingers still traced the wall's constellations, but now with purpose. She stopped on a particular cluster, pressing until the stars flared white. A hidden compartment slid open with a hiss. Inside lay a circlet unlike the others. Cruder, older, its metal dull compared to the Empire's polished relics. The queen lifted it with reverence. The design matched the interlocking circles above Theo and Lasara. "You kept this." The sovereign's voice held no accusation, only weary understanding. For the day the prophecy returned. The queen turned the circlet in the light. "My grandmother told me the stories. How the first bonds were chosen, not made. How their light could reshape worlds." A murmur ran through the chamber. This wasn't history, not officially. The Empire had purged those records generations ago, when political matches became preferable to unpredictable cosmic forces. Yet here stood living proof. A mechanic, and a princess bound by something no council could dictate. Lasara touched her collarbone again. The silver light had faded, leaving the skin unmarked. When she looked at Theo now, something had settled in her gaze. Recognition stripped of uncertainty. He felt it too, that inexplicable rightness he'd only ever experienced. When fixing engines, when parts slid into place with perfect alignment. The sovereign exhaled through his nose. His scepter's crimson glow dimmed as he lowered it. Protocol dictated he kneel before a validated bond, Tradition demanded concessions, but it was his wife's quiet nod that decided him. He bent one knee, then the other, his elaborate robes pooling around him. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembly. Murmurs turned to whispers, then to hesitant genuflections as, one by one, the court followed suit. Theo barely registered them. His attention stayed fixed on Lasara, on the way her fingers still trembled slightly in his. Because he understood. Now the oracle's validation didn't erase the fear. It only made the path forward undeniable. Beyond the chamber, the palace waited. Servants would already be preparing new quarters, scribes recording this anomaly in the archives. Politicians would strategize how to spin this disruption. But for now, in this humming chamber between heartbeats, there was only this. A princess breathing hard through parted lips, a man wiping motor oil absently on his jumpsuit, and the stars on the walls whispering secrets older than dynasties. Outside, the first of Athethera's twin moons rose. Its light caught the queen's ancient circlet, glinting off crude engravings, figures standing not in a palace but in a field, under a yellow sun. The sunspire wing's floating bed bobbed gently as Theo poked it, half convinced it would bite. The surface gave under his finger like water, then reformed perfectly. He'd been given the grand tour, chambers that adjusted temperature to his mood, closets that spawned outfits matching his preferences, even a bathing pool that tuned its minerals to his physiology. None of it felt real. 5 days ago, he'd been elbow-deep in a tractor engine. Now he lived in a palace that seemed determined to outsmart him. His first meal proved disastrous. 12 ceremonial forks glittered beside his plate, each more ornate than the last. The soup spoon kept adjusting its curvature mid-lift. When he finally managed a mouthful, the bowl itself applauded with a soft chime. Several serving staff had to turn away to hide their laughter as broth slopped onto his new silk trousers. The soup tasted faintly of thunderstorms. Sci-Fi loves this scenario, the ordinary human drowning in alien luxury. Arthur Dent's confusion aboard the Heart of Gold. Luke Skywalker's wide-eyed first glimpse of Coruscant. But those stories rarely show the small humiliations. How Theo tripped over levitating steps that adjusted too slowly, or how the bathroom mirror critiqued his shaving technique in melodic chimes. His old life had operated on mechanical cause and effect. This palace behaved like a living thing, constantly second-guessing his needs. The wardrobe proved particularly hostile. When he reached for simple pants, the closet presented brocade leggings that hissed at his touch. The fabric slithered like live serpents before settling into shape. He spent 20 minutes negotiating for something resembling blue jeans, only to discover the trousers auto-tightened whenever he slouched. A valet eventually took pity, whispering that the system responded better to mental commands than physical contact. Worst were the public appearances. Courtiers tracked his every misstep, whispering behind jeweled hands. Theo caught fragments. So uncivilized. That hair. Can't possibly. Their stares prickled like static. He kept expecting someone to yank him aside, declare this all an elaborate prank. The only reassurance came from the markings on his wrist, faint golden lines matching Lasara's, pulsing gently when she was near. Then there were the guards. A pair attended him at all times, their armor shifting color with the light. They never spoke, but their presence itched between his shoulder blades. Protection or surveillance? He couldn't tell. Their expressions stayed carefully neutral when he accidentally pinged the emergency alarm trying to operate a drinking fountain. The bed remained his greatest nemesis. That first night he'd approached cautiously, expecting traps. The floating platform drifted lower as he neared, bobbing invitingly. When he finally lay down, it molded to his shape like warm sand. Perfect comfort. Which was precisely why he couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., he dragged a pillow to the floor. The bed made a wounded sound and dimmed its glow. "What are you doing?" Lasara stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor lights. Moonlight caught the edges of her, making her look half-translucent. Theo rubbed his face. "It's too agreeable." Her laugh surprised them both, bright, unguarded. Not the measured chuckle of court etiquette, but something messier. Human. She crossed to where he sat amidst borrowed blankets and dropped down beside him. The scent of her differed here, away from perfumed halls, something like fresh-cut grass after rain. It took me weeks to sleep properly when they upgraded my chambers, she admitted, picking at the embroidery on a pillow. Sometimes I still sneak into the old nursery. This confession seemed to startle her. Her fingers stilled. Royal composure slid back into place. Theo watched the struggle play out across her features. Here in the shadows, her crown abandoned somewhere, she seemed younger. The markings along her collarbone pulsed faintly gold, reacting to his proximity. "It smells like lavender," he said suddenly. Lasara blinked. "What does?" "The sheets. Back home, my mom used lavender detergent. I hated it. Made me sneeze." He shrugged. "These sheets smell exactly the same." Her forehead creased. "The palace studies your biosignatures. It replicates comforting stimuli." "Yeah, but how did it know?" Theo picked at a loose thread. "I haven't sneezed here. I haven't even thought about laundry." The bed above them made a soft, plaintive noise. Lasara exhaled through her nose, and for a moment, Theo thought she might retreat behind palace walls again. Instead, she lay back on the stolen blankets, staring at the ceiling. The position made her look 16 instead of whatever unguessable alien age she was. "First time I saw you," she said quietly, "you smelled like soil and motor oil. I'd never smelled anything so unrefined." Her nose wrinkled at the memory. "I dreamed about it for nights after." Theo frowned. "That doesn't seem very princessy." It wasn't. She turned her head on the pillow, their noses inches apart. "That's how I knew the bond was real." Outside, Athethera's twin moons cast tangled shadows across the floor. Somewhere, beyond the gardens, a nightbird called in spiraling notes. The palace hummed around them, shifting, adjusting, learning its strange new occupant. Theo woke at dawn, curled on the floor, Lasara's elbow digging into his ribs. She'd stolen most of the blankets. Sunlight caught the gold in her eyelashes, the relaxed curve of her mouth. No regal distance now, just a woman snoring lightly into a pillow. Carefully, so as not to wake her, Theo reached out and touched one floating bedpost. It warmed under his fingers, pulsing gently. Maybe today he'd try sleeping on the damn thing. Maybe today he'd figure out how to use the self-stirring tea whisk without spraying the walls. Small steps, he told himself. One absurdity at a time. Somewhere deep in the palace, an alarm began chiming. Soft at first, then insistent. "Not the cheerful ping of a mist I want to stand in a field," Lasara admitted, her voice quieter than Theo had ever heard it. They sat on her private balcony, the shimmering ribbons of Luminar's aurora writhing overhead. The celestial display should have commanded attention. These were the famous veils of Athethera, visible only once every 8 years. But Theo found himself watching Lasara instead. She'd unpinned her hair, letting the silver strands fall, loose around her shoulders. Moonlight caught the edge of her ceremonial collar, tracing the delicate engravings of twining vines. Her fingers moved absently along its rim, pressing just hard enough to leave temporary marks on her pale skin. Theo swallowed the last of his drink, something fizzy and vaguely mint-flavored that left his tongue tingling. "Like a grassy field?" he asked. He pictured his family's back 40, the way wildflowers poked through the tall grass in summer. Lasara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant palace spires. "With dirt that smells like rain, and things growing unchecked." She hesitated, then added, "I read about them in your Earth databases. The images felt familiar." This admission startled Theo more than any palace wonder. His mental image of Lasara had always included gilded halls and jeweled thrones, not secret browsing sessions about Iowa cornfields. He shifted in his floating chair, another Athetheran contraption that adjusted shape according to his posture, and tried to reconcile the woman before him with the princess who'd declared ownership of him before the entire court. "Don't take this the wrong way," he said, carefully, "but your palace has like 12 botanical gardens. With smart plants that sing, she made a soft noise that wasn't quite a laugh. Programmed beauty, calculated wilderness. Her fingers returned to worrying the collar's edge. I'm 27 cycles old, Theo. I've never touched soil without gloves. Never felt wind without 6 layers of atmospheric shielding. The markers along her collarbone pulsed faintly, a nervous tick he'd begun to recognize. Through their bond, he caught an impression of something heavy and tight, like a coiled spring held too long under pressure. Science fiction brims with royalty, desperate for normalcy. Princess Leia's fleeting moments without her title, Michal from Earthsea disguising himself to walk among commoners. These stories share a truth. Symbols choke their wearers. Theo saw it now in the way Lasara's shoulders relaxed fractionally when attendants left them alone, how she'd begun stealing his Earth-style colloquialisms when nobles weren't listening. They make you wear that all the time, he asked, nodding at her collar. Her answering silence spoke volumes. Theo leaned forward, elbows on knees. Below them, the palace gardens sprawled in perfect fractal patterns, their pathways lit by floating globes. Even the wild sectors followed strict aesthetic principles, not a single vine out of place. He thought of his mother's untamed rose bushes, the way they snagged his shirts when he passed too close. You ever just leave? Twice, she admitted. At 14, I got as far as the outer market before the guards found me. 16, I disguised myself as a shrine attendant. Her lips curved. That time lasted 3 hours. I ate street food that made me sick for days. Her expression turned wistful. Best 3 hours of my life. The confession hovered between them. Theo had spent his adolescence dreaming of leaving. College, scholarships, tech apprenticeships, anything to escape soybean fields and gossip about his father's drinking. Now here sat an alien princess who'd trade all her privilege for an afternoon in those same fields. The irony wasn't lost on him. Lasara turned suddenly, her eyes catching the aurora's glow. When we first bonded, I saw... She hesitated, struggling, for words. Your memories or emotions tied to them. Sunlight through leaves, the creak of wood floors, hands covered in soil up to the elbows. She reached across the space between them, brushing her fingertips against his palm. A spark jumped between them, not painful but startling. The marks on both their wrists flared briefly gold. It felt like remembering, she whispered. Theo's throat tightened. The bond had shown him flashes too. Vast halls empty despite their grandeur. A child's hands practicing intricate gestures alone, the metallic taste of isolation. He hadn't realized Lasara experienced the same. Footsteps sounded in the chamber behind them. Lasara withdrew her hand quickly. By the time the servant appeared with refreshments, her posture had shifted back into regal perfection. Only Theo noticed how her fingers lingered near her collar again, tracing the indentations she'd left earlier. The servant departed with a bow. Below, the gardens had begun their nightly transformation, bioluminescent pathways shifting from blue to violet. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, Athethera's second moon rose, a pale green crescent that cast strange shadows. Lasara exhaled through her nose. Someday, she said abruptly, I want to eat peanut butter under a yellow sun. The specificity made Theo blink. Peanut butter? There was a documentary, she admitted sheepishly, about Earth breakfast foods. The way the narrator described it, sticky, salty sweet paste made from ground legumes, I couldn't imagine such textures being allowed. Her nose wrinkled. Our nutrient synthesizers make everything polite. The image stuck in Theo's mind. This elegant alien woman, her elaborate robe streaked with peanut butter, sitting barefoot in an Indiana meadow. He laughed before he could stop himself. Lasara's eyes narrowed, but her lips quirked. Don't mock me, little human. I'm not, Theo promised, wiping his eyes. It's just, you could have wished for anything. Paris at sunrise, the pyramids. Hell, Disney World. She tilted her head. What is Disney World? Theo opened his mouth, then closed it. How did one explain animatronic presidents to an interstellar princess? Never mind. Peanut butter's better. Silence settled between them, comfortable now. The aurora overhead had intensified, casting everything in liquid silver light. Lasara watched the ribbons twist, her expression unguarded for once. Theo nudged, her foot with his. When this bond settles or whatever, when the court stops losing their minds about it, I'll take you home. He paused, then added, I'll show you goats. Lasara's head snapped around. The small horned creatures, with rectangular pupils. Her excitement shimmered through the bond before she tamped it down. That is acceptable. Theo grinned. He could already picture it. Lasara trying to milk stubborn old Gertie, her pristine robe splattered with mud. Maybe she'd hate every second. Maybe she'd find the chaos strangely freeing. Either way, they'd do it together. The bond pulsed warm between them, carrying silent promises. Peanut butter, goats, a yellow sun. Simple human things that suddenly felt revolutionary. Lasara rested her hand on the balcony rail, palm up as if to catch stardust. Theo covered it with his own, ignoring the servant who discreetly cleared her throat from the doorway. For now, in this stolen moment, they could pretend. Beyond the palace, in the velvet black between stars, something stirred. A subtle wrongness in the fabric of space. Neither noticed. Not yet. Tomorrow would bring councils and protocol and the weight of crowns. But tonight, under Luminar's shimmering veils, they dreamed of fields. The night sky tore open like fabric above the Zewandar Palace. No warning preceded the rip. One moment the veils of Athethera shimmered peacefully, the next something peeled. Back reality itself. Through the gap oozed a ship of living shadow, its surface pulsing in slow waves. Each throb released a sound that wasn't sound, more a vibration in the bones like standing too close to a funeral bell. The palace's crystalline spires trembled in response. Guards raised weapons with shaking hands. Theo stumbled onto the observation deck just as the first psychic alarms began screaming. The noise bypassed his ears entirely, scraping directly against his neurons. He clapped hands overhead, but it didn't help. Nearby, Lasara swayed on her feet. The bond marks along her collarbone flared crimson, a color neither had seen before. Voidborn, she gasped. It's here for the bond. Science fiction often personifies abstract threats. Think of Dementors from Harry Potter feeding on happiness, or the shadows from Babylon 5 that thrive on conflict. This entity operated similarly. The shadow ship extruded tendrils that took shape as they touched ground. Each form flickered between identities, a weeping woman clutching empty robes, AI, child screaming into the void, an armored soldier staring at his dissolving hands. The manifestations had one thing in common. They radiated loss so profound it hurt to look at them. The high priestess collapsed near the western archway, blood trickling from her nose. It remembers, she choked out. All the bonds your family broke. This clarified nothing for Theo. He reached for Lasara's hand, but she was already moving toward the nearest weapon rack. Her ceremonial blade slid from its sheath with a crystalline hum. The sound seemed to enrage the void creatures. Their shifting faces snapped toward her, mouths stretching impossibly wide. The palace guards fired first, their energy lances passed, harmlessly through the shadow forms. One creature absorbed the blast, its chest cavity briefly glowing before returning to darkness. Another guard swung a physical sword. The blade disintegrated on contact, particles swirling into the creatures. Lasara's blade fared better. When she struck, golden sparks erupted along the wound. But the effort visibly drained her. Each swing came slower than the last. Theo watched in horror as her weapon's glow dimmed. The marks on her throat darkened to bruised purple. Behind. You. The warning came too late. A tendril lashed out, wrapping around Lasara's ankle. The contact made her convulse, not from pain, but from whatever memories the void forced into her. Theo saw her eyes roll back, her mouth forming silent words. Instinct took over. He lunged, grasping for any weapon. A forgotten relic tumbled from a toppled display case. The blade of Ethan, an artifact the bond priests had presented days earlier. with vague warnings about unready hands. Theo's fingers closed around the hilt. Fire exploded up his arm, not painful but impossibly bright. The blade's edge burst into golden flames that cast no heat, only light that pushed back the shadows. Theo barely had time to register the weapon's perfect balance before instinct took over. He swung. The blade passed clean through the tendril, holding Lasara. Where it cut, the darkness didn't just part, it screamed. A chorus of voices echoed the sound, human and alien, male and female, all sharing the same devastated note. The severed shadow writhed on the ground before dissolving into mist. For 3 seconds, silence held. The remaining void creatures recoiled. Lasara gasped awake, clutching her chest. Then, as one, every shadow turned toward Theo. The hatred in their ever-changing eyes was unmistakable. "Sheathe the blade," the High Priestess cried. "It recognizes you now." The warning came too late. The void ship pulsed violently. A fresh wave of creatures poured forth, these larger, more defined. Their shifting forms settled into something eerily specific. A young Ethetheran woman with markings like Lasara's, a human man in military garb, their hands reaching for each other across centuries. The resemblance was uncanny. Lasara made a choked sound. "The first princess," she whispered. "And her consort," finished the High Priestess. Her aged hands trembled. The origin of the ban. The implications crashed over Theo. He tightened his grip on Ethan's blade. The weapon thrummed in response, its golden flames burning brighter. Through the bond, he felt Lasara's shock give way to grim understanding. Whatever history these creatures represented, they'd come to finish what was started generations ago. The leading void creature stepped forward. Its form stabilized into the young human man. Early 20s, buzz-cut hair, eyes that might have been hazel when alive. When it spoke, the voice came layered, the soldier's tones underlaid with something ancient and hungry. "They erased us," it said simply. The words triggered something in the palace itself. Hidden symbols flared along the walls, the same interlocking circles from Theo and Lasara's bonding ceremony. The sight seemed to pain the void creatures. They recoiled, hissing. "New life," the High Priestess murmured. Her bloody fingers traced one of the glowing symbols. "After so long," the void creature screamed. The sound shattered every fragile thing in the chamber. Glass artifacts, data pads, even the delicate filigree on the guard's armor. Theo felt the vibration in his teeth, saw blood drip from Lasara's ears. Only the blade of Ethan remained, untouched, its golden flames burning steady. Lasara struggled upright, her own ceremonial blade raised. "Theo," she gasped, "show me." He understood instantly. Their hands met, his around Ethan's hilt, hers over his. The contact sent a shockwave through the chamber. The blade's fire flared white-hot, illuminating every crevice. For the first time, the void creatures hesitated. Their forms flickered uncertainly between past and present. Lost lovers from erased histories, mourners left behind, hungry ghosts of bonds extinguished too soon. The lead figure wavered most of all. The human soldier's face contorted in something like recognition as he stared at Theo and Lasara's joined hands on the blade. Theo acted without thinking. He lowered the weapon slightly. "Tell her I'm sorry." The chamber held its breath. The void creature froze. Then slowly, its anger seemed to drain away. The edges of its form began dissolving. Not the violent disintegration from before, but something gentler, more final. One by one, the other shadows followed suit. They didn't vanish so much as fade, like nightmares yielding to dawn. The great ship above pulsed once, a sound almost like a sigh, before the Terran reality stitched itself closed. Silence settled over the wrecked observation deck. The blade of Ethan's flames died to embers, its weight suddenly heavy in Theo's hands. He turned to Lasara, questions crowding his throat, but she was staring past him, eyes wide. The High Sovereign stood in the shattered doorway, his ceremonial robes torn, his face ashen. He looked not at the dissipating shadows, nor the glowing blade, but at the symbols newly revealed on the chamber walls. "Father?" Lasara's voice, barely carried. The sovereign didn't answer. His gaze shifted to Theo, then to their still joined hands on the blade's hilt. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of centuries. "We were wrong." The void creature's form flickered, its edges dissolving and reforming like ink in water. Then it settled, locking into focus with sudden, terrible clarity. A young Athetheran woman with markings nearly identical to Lasara's, her silver-white hair half-braided in the old imperial style. The resemblance was uncanny. She reached out with hands that wavered at the edges, fingers stretching toward someone only she could see. Her lips moved without sound. The entire chamber trembled. "They erased us." The voice came from everywhere. The creature's mouth, the walls, the blade in Theo's hands, fractured, layered. Ice cracking over a deep lake. Lasara made a choked sound. The High Sovereign turned away, his shoulders rigid. Only the Queen stood transfixed, tears tracing gleaming paths down her cheeks. She reached toward the apparition, as if against her will. Sci-fi and fantasy have long understood how forbidden love stories become cosmic through sheer persistence. Think of Padme and Anakin's tragedy rippling across the galaxy in Star Wars. Jara and the Starman's doomed romance echoing through centuries in Doctor Who. The void creature standing before them now belonged to this lineage, a love so violently interrupted that its grief took physical form across generations. The creature's near-translucent fingers passed through a console. Where they touched, the metal frosted over. "We were the first," it sighed, the words carrying the weight of centuries. She gave herself a human name. Lillian. The syllables sounded alien in its mouth, precious and fragile. Before their eyes, a second figure materialized, taller, broader, in a military uniform centuries out of date. Human. His features flickered, struggling to maintain cohesion where the Athetheran woman's remained clear. His hand extended toward hers, never quite touching. The phantom scent of gunpowder and lavender filled the air. The war ended. The creature continued. "We hid, but they came." A shudder passed through its form. The humans in the room needed no explanation. They knew what happened to soldiers who strayed too far from base without leave. What happened to aliens caught behind enemy lines. The High Sovereign finally spoke, his voice ragged. "The archives record no such bond." "Of course not." The Queen wiped her face with a shaking hand. "Father had the records purged after she—" Her words dissolved. The void figures pulsed brighter, their outlines sharpening. Details emerged. The human man's dog tags half tucked under his collar, the Athetheran woman's ceremonial dagger strapped to her thigh. They'd died armed, then fighting. Lasara stepped forward, her own dagger trembling in her grip. The markings along her collarbones glowed faint blue now, mirroring the spectral woman's. A question hovered on her lips. Why them? Why now? But the void creature answered before she could speak. "You carry our same defiance." Its eyes, Lasara's eyes, locked onto Theo. "But your human is softer than mine was." For the first time, something resembling tenderness entered its shattered voice. Hers baked bread, smelled like cinnamon. The words hit Theo like a physical blow. His grip on Ethan's blade slackened. The weapon's flames dimmed. Beneath the grand statements of interstellar politics and ancient prophecy, this was the truth they'd all missed. The void hadn't come for vengeance, not really. It had come because it remembered the weight of a human hand in yours, the stupid little details that anchored you to a life. Cinnamon, gun oil, a shared joke in a language neither fully spoke. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The more the void creature spoke, the more its form destabilized, not from weakness, but from something like relief. Centuries of rage and sorrow unwinding at last. Theo moved before he fully processed the decision. He lowered Ethan's blade, letting its tip scrape the floor. The golden fire retreated to embers. Complete silence followed. "Tell her I'm sorry," he said. The effect was immediate. The human soldier's form stilled. His face, what remained of it, twisted in something like recognition. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber flickered, caught between past and present. Then the void figures began dissolving. Not violently this time, but softly like mist under morning sun. "Lillian," the soldier murmured. His hand lifted, almost touching the Ethetheran woman's cheek. I waited. The woman's answering smile lasted just a second before she too began fading. I know. One last pulse of light, then nothing. No grand explosion, no final curse. Just silence where the void had been. Theo realized his face was wet. The queen openly wept. Even the High Sovereign's rigid posture had collapsed slightly, his gaze fixed on the empty air where the figures had stood. Lasara was the first to move. She crossed to Theo in 3 strides, her fingers closing around his where they still gripped the blade's hilt. Her touch sent fresh warmth through the metal. Together they watched the last remnants of golden light reflect off the chamber walls. The High Priestess broke the silence. She knelt beside a section of wall where fresh markings had appeared, archaic symbols unnoticed until now. "The original bond chamber," she whispered. "They built over it." No one spoke. The implications settled over them one by one. The weight of history, of choices made and erased. The void's grief hadn't been random. It had been curating its revenge for centuries, waiting for a bond strong enough to hear it. Theo exhaled, shakily. The weapon in his hands felt different now, not just a tool, but a conduit. Across from him, the High Sovereign sagged against a console, his face ashen. "I thought—" The Sovereign began, then stopped. His throat worked. The Queen finished for him. "You thought they were myths." She touched the newly revealed markings, on the wall. Like Father did. Beyond the cracked observation windows, Ethethera's twin moons cast overlapping shadows. The palace's automatic systems had already begun repairing the damage. Panels sliding back into place, fractured crystal, mending itself. But some cracks ran too deep for quick fixes. The High Priestess rose slowly, her old bones creaking. "The Oracle spoke true," she said simply. "The cycle is broken." Lasara tightened her grip on Theo's hand. He squeezed back, feeling the pulse of their bond beneath his fingertips. A steady rhythm now, no longer erratic with fear. The blade of Ethan's embers warmed between their palms. Outside, dawn's first light touched the palace spires. The business of governance would resume soon, edicts to draft, alliances to reconsider, histories to rewrite. But for this single quiet moment, in the space between darkness and daylight, they simply stood together. Survivors of a story much older than themselves. The door seals hissed open behind. No one needed to ask what would come next. The markings on the walls pulsed faintly in agreement. Some laws were made to be rewritten. The rogue planet transmission crackled to life during what should have been a routine debrief. Static danced across the council chamber's main screen before resolving into an image that made the High Sovereign's grip fracture his armrest. There, standing against a backdrop of unmistakable earth foliage, was a woman with Lasara's eyes. Older now, wiser at the edges, but undeniably the same. At her side stood a child, no more than 10 cycles old, their pointed ears poking through, curls of chestnut hair. Freckles dusted their nose, pale gold against sun-kissed skin. The council chamber froze. Only the whispering hum of the holographic projectors broke the silence. Theo recognized that look immediately. The slightly raised chin, the way the woman's fingers tightened around the child's shoulder when startled, the same tells Lasara had when nervous, the same way his own mother used to grip him at crowded county fairs. "Impossible," whispered Chancellor Vortis. His data pad slipped from limp fingers, clattering against the iridescent floor. No one moved to retrieve it. The woman on screen adjusted what looked like an old mining headset, her lips moving soundlessly for 3 agonizing seconds before audio finally synced. "Testing again. Can anyone hear me?" The voice belonged to another lifetime. The queen inhaled sharply, her nails digging into her palms. Science fiction has always wrestled with hybrid identities, Spock struggling between Vulcan logic and human emotion, River Tam's fractured psyche and Firefly. But those stories rarely show the moment of discovery, that seismic instant when a hidden lineage suddenly makes sense of everything. Theo saw it play out now in real time across the Sovereign's face, the way his anger melted into shock, then something perilously close to hope. "I know what you're thinking," the woman continued, unaware she had an audience. The image flickered, revealing glimpses of her surroundings, a wooden cabin wall, a window framing pine trees, a bookshelf crammed with Athetheran texts beside dog-eared copies of National Geographic. "But before you trace this signal, understand we're not coming back." She touched the child's hair absently. The motion made something in Lasara's posture fracture. The child, Theo estimated Earth age 9 or 10, tilted their head. Hybrid features became clearer in that movement. The slope of their brow more Athetheran than human, but their smile all earthbound mischief. They held something in their hands, turning it over curiously. "A pine cone. The archives show you deceased," the High Sovereign said hoarsely. He didn't seem to realize he'd spoken aloud. The woman on screen couldn't hear him, of course. This was a recording, bouncing off abandoned comboys between stars. "Officially I am. The woman," Theo's mind still shied away from calling her what she so clearly was, folded her arms. Her jacket sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing faded bond marks along her forearms. Not gold like Lasara's, but silver, dulled with age and something else, distance perhaps. Vortis never checked the escape pod logs. Chancellor Vortis made a strangled sound. The Sovereign didn't look at him. Hybrid children appear throughout Sci-Fi as bridges between worlds. Jake Sully's Navi-human offspring and Avatar, the half-Vulcan offspring of Star Trek's many interspecies unions. But stories often skip the messy middle, the awkward phase where lineages collide visibly in a single face. The child's ears twitched when a bird called off-screen, the pointed tips rotating slightly like a cat's, a purely Athetheran reflex. But their laughter when the pine cone shed scales on their shoes, that belly-deep, unguarded delight belonged to any Earth playground. "He looks like me," Theo murmured without thinking. Lasara made a noise like a punched-out breath. Because it was true. The child's features weren't fully one or the other, caught in that uncomfortable middle where Theo had lived his entire life. Too pale for his father's family reunions, too dark for his mother's. Never quite fitting. Watching this small person examine pine cones with scientific curiosity while their toes wiggled in Kentucky mud, it cracked something open in his chest. The recording continued mercilessly. "They can't erase us anymore," the woman was saying. "The new bond proves it." She reached off-screen, producing an object that made the entire council inhale. A royal signet half-melted from atmospheric re-entry, but unmistakable. "Lasara." She breathed the name like a prayer. "Your human is stronger than mine was. Hold on to that." Then, like salt in the wound, the child piped up, "Mom says when I'm older I can meet my sister." Their voice held the exact cadence of rural Midwest America, layered over something softer. Alien vowels hiding in human consonants. The recording cut out there, leaving the council chamber in ringing silence. No one moved. The Queen's breathing had gone terrifyingly quiet. Across the table, Lasara reached blindly for Theo's hand. Her fingers were icy. "She's alive," she whispered. Not joy, not anger, just stunned numbness. The High Sovereign stood abruptly. The motion sent his hover chair skidding back. For one wild moment, Theo thought he might smash the view screen. Instead, the ruler of Athethera did something no living soul had witnessed. He pressed his forehead against the darkened display, his shoulders shaking silently. The implications crashed over the room in waves. Not just a forbidden bond, but a child. Not just a missing queen, but a calculated cover-up stretching back years. The Sovereign's ragged inhale when the child had called Lasara sister would haunt Theo forever. Vortis found his voice first. Your Radiance, the protocols, revise them." The sovereign didn't turn around. Perhaps it was the rawness in his voice, maybe the way the queen's tears fell openly now. Whatever the reason, Chancellor Vortis did the unthinkable. He knelt. Not the deep genuflection reserved for celestial events, but something subtler. Just one knee touching floor, head bowed. One by one, the council followed, not as subjects to a ruler, but as witnesses to something too large for protocol. Theo watched them bow, proud aristocrats who'd sneered at him days before, and felt something unclench in his chest. Not victory exactly. More like the moment when a stubborn engine finally turns over, when all the mismatched parts click into working order. Lasara squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. Outside the chamber windows, Athethera's twin moons rose, unseen. The debate would come later, about precedence, about diplomacy, about how to handle a half-human heir living barefoot on a backwater planet. But for now, in this hushed moment heavy with unsaid words, only one truth mattered. Love had already rewritten the laws. The queen stood first. She crossed to the view screen with the careful steps of someone walking on ice, her hands outstretched as if she might pull her wife through the glass. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a woman rebuilding entire worlds from scratch. Prep, a shuttle. The sovereign finally turned from the screen. His face was dry now, expression unreadable. He looked at his daughter, really looked, for the first time since the footage played. "Your mother," he said roughly, "always did hate protocol." Lasara made a noise halfway between a laugh and sob. Theo squeezed her hand, his throat too tight for words. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, beyond the 7 moons and the nebulous storms and the wreckage of old prejudices, a child on Earth tucked a pine cone into their pocket, unaware of how far its echoes would reach. The queen's reflection smiled faintly in the darkened screen. Tomorrow would bring debates, unrest, perhaps even panic among the traditionalist houses. But tonight they allowed themselves this one quiet victory. The first royal hybrid would not be the last. Bessie the goat wore flowers in her horns as holograms of Athetheran nobles flickered above the hay bales. The barn smelled of pine shavings and warm milk, undercut by the faint ozone tang of projected dignitaries. Theo adjusted his borrowed suit collar for the 7th time in as many minutes. His mother's antique pocket watch, the one she'd sworn would bring luck, kept catching sunlight as it swung from his waistcoat. Across the makeshift aisle, Lasara stood barefoot in the grass, her usual silver robes traded for a simple white sundress from the local boutique. The daisy chain threaded through her hair trembled slightly in the breeze. The High Sovereign watched from his holographic perch atop a feed sack, expression unreadable. His traditional headpiece clashed violently with the rusted tractor behind him. None of the Earth guests seemed to notice. They were too busy passing around mason jars of lemonade and homemade blackberry wine. A breeze sent the projector wavering for one awkward moment, stretching the sovereign's image like taffy before it settled. Weddings in fiction symbolize unity. Think Padme and Anakin's secret Naboo ceremony bridging royalty, and Jedi, Zane, and Princess Allura's cross-cultural union in Voltron. But real fusion looks messier. The buffet table alone told that story. Aunt Mabel's famous casserole sat beside glimmering Athetheran fruit that changed flavor when you touched it. Old man. Henderson kept trying to feed scraps to one of the hovering ceremonial drones. Lasara took a deep breath as the music started. Not the traditional Zu Theo's hand shook as he reached for hers. He'd seen her face down void-born entities without flinching, watched her command entire fleets with a word. But here, in his childhood barn, she looked nervous as a kitten in a thunderstorm. Her fingers were icy against his palms. The Earthborn minister cleared his throat. Somewhere in the rafters, a barn swallow trilled. "I brought something," Theo whispered. He fumbled in his pocket, producing a ring that caught the light like captured starlight. The band was a Athetheran alloy, but the stone, petrified wood, he explained quietly, from the oak that got struck by lightning behind Grandpa's tool shed. Lasara's breathing hitched. She remembered that memory shard from their bonding, 6-year-old Theo hiding under that very tree during summer storms, counting seconds between flash and thunder. Opposite them, the High Sovereign's posture stiffened. Traditional Ethetheran vows involved exchanging plasma-forged circlets, not lumpy earth minerals. But when Lasara slid a matching ring onto Theo's finger, an iridescent band that seemed to hold entire galaxies within its depths, the holographic ruler merely sighed. Progress. Rituals reveal priorities. The Ethetherans would have had 12 ceremonial hand-washings by now. Instead, Theo's little niece raced forward with a mason jar full of butterflies at the minister's nod. Lasara's gasp when they erupted skyward made the hovering noble projectors flicker in sympathy. The child beamed up at them, missing front teeth and all. "I now pronounce you—" The minister paused, glancing at his notes. "Starbound and earth-rooted?" He shrugged as laughter rippled through the crowd. The electronic translator on his lapel had given its best attempt. The kiss tasted like sunshine and strawberries from the U-Pick farm down the road. Some of the projected nobles covered their eyes. Others smiled despite themselves. The old queen, now appearing via private transmission, rather than official channels, pressed her fingertips to the screen in silent blessing. Her exiled wife watched from a picnic blanket, with their hybrid child half asleep in her lap, both faces glowing in the golden light. Toasts followed in both languages, with varying degrees of translation mishaps. Someone, probably Theo's cousin, Ricky, spiked the Ethetheran ceremonial wine with moonshine. The resulting diplomatic incident involved a very tipsy chancellor attempting to line dance with a holographic aide. Bessie the goat made her disapproval known by eating part of the velvet curtain backdrop. As dusk painted the sky in strawberry hues, Lasara pulled Theo behind the barn where the old tire swing still hung from its oak. The sounds of the party faded behind them. Only the cicadas here, and the occasional burst of holographic static when someone wandered too far from the projectors. She leaned back against the rough bark, her bare feet brushing the packed earth. "This is better," she admitted. Her fingers traced the petrified wood ring. No palace, no crowds, no expectations beyond the fireflies beginning their nightly dance between corn rows. Theo watched a particularly bold lightning bug land on her shoulder. Its glow pulsed softly in time with her markings. Better than what? Than being watched. She gestured vaguely skyward where the first stars were appearing. Every move, every breath analyzed for propriety. Here, her hand spread, taking in the leaning fence posts, the dented tractor, the entire gloriously imperfect sprawl of the farm. "We just are." Inside, someone cranked up the old Wurlitzer. The opening chords of Brown-Eyed Girl floated through the summer air. Theo offered his hand. Lasara took it without hesitation, the golden marks along her arms shimmering as they twirled in the gathering dark. The sovereign's projection watched from the porch steps, his holographic fingers tapping almost imperceptibly to the beat. When the queen's transmission appeared beside him unannounced, her image 2 decades older but her smile unchanged, his stiff posture eased slightly. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some transformations required no commentary. Morning would bring complications. The new treaty draft sat unsigned on the Royal Shuttle's console. Hybrid immigration policies needed rewriting. Theo's farm skills translated poorly to intergalactic diplomacy, and Lasara's Earth education had gaps wide enough to fly a starship through. But tonight, they danced barefoot under a yellow moon, somewhere between stardust and soil. Back. Inside, the Sovereign's abandoned hollow unit flickered once. A technical glitch, surely, projecting his silhouette swaying ever so slightly with the music before powering down. Their daughter learned to plant carrots and chart nebulas in the EO. Same afternoon, the farmhouse porch served as her classroom, one moment digging in Terra's rich soil, the next studying holographic star maps with her Ethetheran tutor. She wore overalls with silver-threaded hems, her pointed ears poking through sun-bleached curls. The neighbors still talked about the time she'd reprogrammed the tractor's GPS to display in 3 galactic languages. 10 years had softened the galaxy's whispers. Farm Boy Prince no longer carried its old venom. Theo found the term, scribbled in margins of interstellar trade agreements now, always with a faint smile. The Zewendar court had stopped clutching their pearls every time he wore boots to dinner. Well, most of them. Their son's homework sprawled across the kitchen table, wormhole calculations jotted on the back of a feed store receipt. He favored his mother's bone structure but inherited Theo's stubborn cowlick. Yesterday's clothes lay in a heap by the door, smelling of earthgrass and stardust in equal measure. Theo knew better than to move them. The kid tracked dirt from 2 worlds. Hybrid families in sci-fi always serve this purpose. Spock bridging Vulcan and human, Korra's mixed heritage and Rebel Moon. They prove the galaxy's fractures can heal. But stories rarely show the mundane, reality. Lunchboxes containing both peanut butter sandwiches and nutrient cubes. Children who answer math problems in 2 numbering systems. The wonder lives in these small things. Dad! Their daughter burst through the screen door, her cupped hands leaking soil. The Martian terraforming modules conflicting with the cornfield sensors again. She deposited an earthworm onto his paperwork. The creature wriggled across a clause about cross-planetary agricultural standards. Theo sighed. This was the 3rd time this month. Their patchwork life generated endless such glitches. His Earth tech never quite meshing with her Athetheran tools. He reached for the antique radio they used as a makeshift intercom. "Lass, we need you at the West Quadrant again." Static crackled in response. Somewhere in the fields, his wife would be cursing in 2 languages. The porch swing creaked as their son flopped down beside him. "I fixed the tractor's plasma converter," the boy announced, wiping grease on already stained jeans. His markings, fainter than Lasara's, gold-flecked with blue, glowed when he tinkered. Theo didn't understand half his inventions. The kid had built a hover converter for the chicken coop last week. The hens still hadn't forgiven him. Upstairs, a portal hummed to life. Athetheran relatives arrived for Sunday dinner in flashes of silver light, stepping carefully around the piles of earth shoes by the door. The old queen brought her famous crystalline desserts, now wrapped in Walmart Tupperware after the Gladware incident. Her wife, Theo's long-lost mother-in-law, carried armfuls of Earth novels she couldn't read but loved for their smell. "Your Highness." Theo's dad nodded to the sovereign, handing him a beer with practiced ease. The ruler of an interstellar empire accepted it without comment, his jeweled rings clinking against the bottleneck. Some traditions transcended species. The screen door slammed. Lasara strode in, smelling of ozone and fresh-cut grass, her hair escaping its braid. She'd traded court robes for cut-off shorts years ago, though her posture would always scream royalty. Their daughter immediately pelted her with questions about Phobos's soil composition. Science fiction loves these moments of cross-generational harmony. The Enterprise's crew sharing meals, the Guardians of the Galaxy becoming family. But real, blending looks messier. The Sovereign still winced when called Grandpa. Theo's mother kept mispronouncing the Athetheran dessert names. Their hybrid children moved seamlessly between these worlds, fluent in customs the adults still stumbled over. After dinner, the family gathered on the back porch as dual sunsets painted the sky, Earth's fading gold beneath Athethera's shimmering silver projection. The kids argued over holographic markers, mapping a new trade route between cornfields and nebulas. Somewhere in the house, the ancient radio crackled with news from 2 worlds. Lasara's fingers found Theo's, her calluses rough against his palm. The bond marks glowed softly where their wrists touched. 10 years hadn't dimmed the wonder of that connection. Not the cosmic significance, but the quiet rightness of it. A princess and a mechanic. Stardust and soil. Across the yard, their son demonstrated his latest invention. A holographic projector jury-rigged into a mason jar. The image flickered. Earth's moon superimposed over Athethera's 7. Dual landscapes collided in the grass at their feet. The sovereign sipped his bourbon, watching the children's hybrid shadow stretch across the porch. His expression softened in a way the court never saw. Evolution took time. But under this patchwork sky, with fireflies dancing around imported glow vines. Even the most stubborn traditions could bend. The radio static resolved into music, something old in hue,